Talk over drink.
Talks over drinks.
Good evening, good evening. Welcome to another great episode of Talks Over Drinks. My name is Corey Fauconier. I am mobile this evening in an undisclosed location in 48, and my tractor, Mandy, is driving, and we have our Christmas lights in the background for you.
So definitely welcome everybody. Welcome to another episode of Talks Over Drinks. So my brother Corey is out on the road, as you can see. He's traveling and he gets to see a lot of great scenery around this country. And
Yes, he
I get
does.
to I get to be here in Richmond, Virginia, and enjoy this time that we have to be able to be stationary. So I'm gonna start off as usual with a food for action moment for us. And it goes a little something like this. What's good for me and mine's is good for you and yours. Now, that right there was inspired by a recent story that I saw earlier today, and it was actually about President Biden, who actually, they say that he has uh, basically did a record of pardons or clemencies, 1,500 people to be exact, that he had pardoned. And it says, issuing 39 presidential pardons, the White House says. So the single largest act of clemency in modern history. So it makes me think about, of course, recently he has pardoned his son. So a lot of people say, hey, I guess what's good for him and his is he sees that as being good for others also. And a lot of the people that were actually pardoned, it looked like had like drug convictions and things like that, had some type of substance abuse type of situation. So that's what made me think of that food for action moment. And let's see, Corey, are you able to get with us? Can you hear me?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now
Yep,
we
you're
can.
coming
Yeah.
in now.
Okay, there we go. Well, I appreciate that food for action. And moving on, Jeff, my brother of another color up in Keswick, Virginia. Jeff, how are you this evening, sir?
All right, I've got my Evan Williams and Coke Zero, which I wholeheartedly endorse. It'll make you feel a lot better.
Well,
Just
you drink that for me because I'm still drinking water.
I will drink. I already drank one for you, and I'll drink another one. But we're kicking it up here in Keswick. I'm not really in Keswick, but that's my mailing address. But we're out in the middle of nowhere. We're somewhere east of Charlottesville and west of Richmond at an undisclosed location down here in the bunker. But I'm glad that we can have our special guest, Sandie Gilson, all the way from Oregon, which I think that's a state now. Um, she's with the Greater Idaho movement, and I've followed this somewhat. I've heard it mentioned on the radio. I've seen it on the internet. I'm fascinated by it. I don't have any skin in that game because I don't live out there, but I do understand the point where you live in a state and you feel like you're disenfranchised by everybody else in your state, and you wish you could become a part of the state next to you. The sentiment is real, and I appreciate my brother to the west of me, Joshua Huffman, Markel over there in Richmond, Corey at his undisclosed location, and Sandie in Hanover County, where I used to live. So we're all here. We're interested to hear what you have to say. So why don't you tell us where you're, if you grew up there, tell us a little bit about yourself. You married, single, got kids, what do you do for a living? What do you enjoy? And what's the organization about? Kick it.
Okay, my name is Sandie Gilson, and I'm actually a fifth generation Oregonian. My what is that, three greats came out here during the 1800s to prospect gold, and the family stayed. I was actually born and raised on the east side of the state. When we refer to the east side of the state, we're talking about the east side of the Cascades. The Cascades cut the state in half, or actually it's 1/3 to 2/3. 2/3 of about 62% of the landmass of Oregon is actually east of the Cascade. But the population east of the Cascade is only about 400,000, where west or northwest Oregon has several million. Portland, of course, is well over 1 million. And then there's Eugene, where the University of Oregon is also another million. And so the majority of the population is actually in the northwest of this state. And those areas are extremely liberal. And I do mean extremely liberal. And for the last 40 years, the Democrats or the very liberal progressives have dominated this state. We haven't had a governor here in Oregon that was Republican in over 40 years. Those policies, those progressive policies, are very extreme in this state. We're considered one of the bluest states. But if you take a look at our map, our voting map, you will see that there's only 5 of the 36 counties that vote blue. 31 counties vote red. But those 5 counties have the majority of the population in them. Therefore, we are a blue state. But and it's gotten really bad here. They've done some very experimental stuff. They legalized all drugs here for a period of time and realized that that was not a smart move. It caused an explosion of homelessness, drug addicts on the street. I mean, we're talking somebody could be walking down the street, have a pocket full of heroin, and the police could see them, and they would write them $100 ticket and tell them, if you called this 800 number, you don't have to pay that $100. And then just walk by. They couldn't take the drugs from them. They couldn't stop them. They couldn't leave them off the street. So what happened is a lot of areas in Oregon had open drug markets, open drug usage on the streets. And the citizens actually fought back from that. And we've now, as of July or September this year, we recriminalized it slightly. Means that it is a misdemeanor to have a pocket full of heroin now. And you can be put in jail, but there is 15 steps that have to be taken to give you a chance to go to rehab before they can actually put you in jail. So it's getting a little better. Since the recriminalization of drugs in our state, we've seen a little bit of reduction in homelessness in most areas because Washington decided to try this experiment. And so those that are addicted to drugs and wanted to have it on them and not get in trouble have now moved to Washington state. So, it's been horrid. You will see areas of Portland, or you used to see areas of Portland that were nothing but people shooting up down the street. They had a right to camp ordinance, and that has been repealed also, to where if you had a tent, you could put it up anywhere on public land in any sidewalk or public right of way, and they could not remove you. I have a brother-in-law that had a business in Portland. He would call the police because the homeless would be sleeping in the doorway of his business and his clients couldn't get in. And the police go, "We can't do anything about it. They have a right to be there." He has eventually sold his business and closed it. But this is the type of extreme progressive rules that we live under. The newest one coming out as of January 1st is emission rules. It's not surprising. Most of us out here in Eastern Oregon are ranchers, farmers. We hunt, we fish, we run our cow herds and this, that, and the other thing. But Oregon is going to is starting on these emission rules for vehicles, to where we can no longer have. It's not that we can no longer have them. It's that 11% of all 3/4 ton pickups or larger have to be electric. The biggest problem with that here throughout the United States is nobody makes an electric 3/4 ton pickup.
Nope.
Therefore, if you've got a 1 ton or a 3/4 pickup and 11% have to be electric, there's a real question as to whether Oregon will continue the registration of any of these larger vehicles. But as a rancher, how do you move your horses or cows or drive your tractors or transport your tractors from field to field without a 3/4 ton pickup? You know, it is in the town that I live in John Day, Oregon, which is 150 miles east of Bend, Oregon. We're mostly ranchers, farmers, loggers, and all of us have 3/4 ton pickups because we need to go get wood. We need to haul our cows. We need to haul our horses. And now we're all wondering if we're not going to be able to register our cars because they don't meet the EPA emission standards, which are unrealistic here in Oregon. My family has a large RV, a diesel pusher RV. We don't know if we'll be able to continue to register that because there are no electric RVs, you know, at 40 feet that meet that class. Therefore, they may not be registering these. These are the type of policies that just don't make sense for Eastern Oregon. I mean, I don't think you guys understand how rural Eastern Oregon is. If I was to get cancer, it would be a 3-hour drive to cancer treatment for me, one way. It's a 3-hour drive for me to go to Walmart.
Wow.
It's a 3-hour drive for me to go to Costco.
Are they infiltrating the education system in Oregon and starting to say boys can be girls and their parents don't have to be told about it?
Oh, absolutely. That's all part of the progressive rules that we're dealing with out here. You know, that tampons have to be in boys' locker rooms and in boys' bathrooms. This is the mandate. That if somebody decides they're a girl, they must play on the girls' team, you know, and if you're wrestling and you're a girl and you're a wrestler and you're wrestling against a biological boy, you're going to lose. And a lot of our female wrestlers out here just refuse to wrestle anymore.
Good.
But there is areas and pockets in Eastern Oregon in which refuse to do it. And we just say no. We just say no.
Are they having the issue with the girls' basketball that they're having in Iowa, which appears to be that a few teams are very strong and the other high schools don't want to play them because they get beat like 82-23?
We haven't seen that in our Eastern Oregon, and I no longer have children in high school, so I don't follow it as much as others. But
yes.
Certainly in Western Oregon, we're seeing a lot of that. Here in Eastern Oregon, we're a lot more conservative. We're more likely to not allow that and stuff like that.
And Trump carried all those counties, didn't he?
Yeah, Trump carried all but 4 counties in Oregon.
And I suspect it wasn't 51-49. It was probably 65 or 70%, right?
Our county was 82% Trump.
Okay. So I wonder how this got started because you've done something very clever. A lot of people talked about let's create a state, but they run afoul of and it's completely constitutional. Constitution authorizes it as long as both states agree. The problem is you get to questions of senators. And so if you had an Eastern Oregon state, you would have, I hope I got my directions right. I'm dyslexic, so east could be west for me. But then you would have 2 senators and they would cancel out the 2 senators from the west. And so nobody's going to agree to that. So what you've done is you're trying to move the boundary line
between
west.
the 2 states. Correct.
So how did that get started? Because I'm sure everybody said at first, well, yeah, in theory that could be done. By the way, if you go to West Virginia, you're actually in a state that was created just by that provision constitution. So it has been done before.
Well, actually, Oregon state boundary moved in 1968. The boundary between Oregon and Washington moved. There was a little bit in 1968 or 1958. I'm sorry, it was 1958. The Oregon boundary crossed the Columbia River and took up a little piece of Washington. And Washington and Oregon got together and said, this really doesn't make sense. The Columbia River out here is huge. It is, almost a full half a mile wide, and they said it doesn't make sense for Oregon to have to govern something across this huge river. And so they did a compact, an interstate compact, and said, we will give that piece on the other side of the Columbia River, because the Columbia River had moved, to Washington, and Oregon will stay south of the Columbia River and Washington will be north of the Columbia River. So that was in 1958. So we're not talking ancient history.
I didn't know that.
Most people don't.
I do know they make a lot of good wine there. I'm retired from the second largest distributor of wine in the United States, and a lot of the stuff comes from the Columbia Valley.
Yeah, the Columbia Valley. But and Oregon is we have wineries out here. Actually, wineries are becoming very big in all this. But with these EPA emission tests, how do you farm? You can't have your diesel tractor because there's no electric tractors.
Sandie, you know what you need to do? Run it all on wind and solar. Sarcasm, by the way.
Let me ask you this, Ms. Gilson. So, would Oregon allow you guys to title and register your vehicles in a neighboring state and still allow you to drive them? I know that I think like Northern Virginia and Maryland and DC have an agreement. If you live or work in one of those three places, Virginia allows you to have Virginia tags on your car if you live in Maryland or DC.
We'd have to look at those. Technically, you're supposed to be a resident of the state that your car's registered in. So if we tried to register it in Idaho, if we're not a resident or don't have a home and live there, then we would not be able to register it in Idaho.
Is there a personal property tax that would be implicated by the registration of a vehicle?
Oregon just has registration fees. It doesn't have a personal property tax on most vehicles or cars. There is personal property tax on equipment. It's but that's not minimal, but not on cars. Like we can own multiple cars and not have a property income.
Yes.
A personal tax on it. Some of the big RVs will have a tax on it, but it's rather minimal. However, Oregon, which is known for not having a sales tax, has a luxury tax on new cars. If you buy a brand new car here, you have to pay 0.5% when you register your car for the value of the car. But we don't have sales tax. That's just a luxury
You're like Delaware.
tax. Yeah. But if I buy a car that has at least 10,000 miles on it, then I don't have to pay that luxury tax. So none of us buy new cars.
So how did this get started? Who's the driving force behind it? Somebody had to have an idea and they had to really push it.
Our president, Mike McCarter, was meeting with friends at a pizza place in Lapine, Oregon, which is south of Bend. And they were talking about this, and they said, we need to start a new state, which is most everybody's statement. And they said, well, there hasn't been a new state since forever. I think 1958 was when Alaska was added. So they said, what can we do? Why don't we just join Idaho? Because Idaho's government is actually 80% Republican. And like Oregon is 80% Democrat, Idaho is 80% Republican. And we're a lot like Idaho. We have the same climate. We have the same makeup in small towns and more rural districts. And so Mike started talking about it with his friends, and they decided, how do we do this? And they said, let's go to the people of each county and ask them. And so we started a campaign in which we gathered signatures and got it on the ballot in each county, because you can gather signatures and get things on ballots. There's ballot initiatives here in Oregon. And we did that, and we've done it in 10 of the counties have gone through the ballot process. 3 counties, the county commissioners actually put the question on the ballot for us, where they said, let's just see what our people want and whether they want this. And so out of 15 counties in Eastern Oregon, 13 counties have voted and said they want this. So we started going county by county and figuring out, do the people actually want this? And the idea, and then we did research in the Constitution and found that it is legal. This would be the biggest landmass. 62% of Oregon's land would actually go to Idaho. So it's a large chunk. So
Do you like potatoes?
yes, we do.
I have a neighbor from Idaho, and they still have the Idaho tags, and it says famous potatoes on it.
Yeah, they
But
do. Actually, Oregon used to produce almost as many potatoes as Idaho, except
I didn't know that.
they've
When-
breached some dams and taken out most of the potato
When you
ground.
say it's constitutional, I'm not saying it's not, but is there an article or section in the Constitution that kind of allows this?
You know,
It's Article 4, Section 3.
That's it. Article 4,
Okay.
Section B.
And it says essentially it's really awkwardly worded, but it basically says no new state can be made of another state unless both states agree. So what
So,
that
in
means
other
in
words-
reverse is if both states agree, you can change a boundary.
Well,
So
At
if
this point,
Oregon-
they're avoiding that issue of the 2 senators, because you'd have 2 more senators. If you had a state, you'd have 2 more senators. And so the liberals aren't going to agree to, and they've really taken this off. As a matter of fact, so much so that there's opposition from outside of Oregon trying to discredit your movement, as I understand it.
Oh,
But if they moved from Oregon to Idaho, that's not going to affect the balance of the Senate, because
will not.
Oregon has 2 Democrats and Idaho has 2 Republicans. So I don't see how it would affect the balance of the Senate. I just wasn't sure, do both legislatures have to agree on it? And I
both
see Joshua has a
legislatures
question
have
on his
to
face.
agree on it.
And the
Well,
Congress.
Josh?
it's actually not a question. It's actually a comment. No, I mean, you say that both states have to agree, but historically that's actually not true. When Virginia and West Virginia actually had a dispute over 2 of the counties that later went to form West Virginia, that Virginia did not wish to surrender, but the Supreme Court ruled against the state of Virginia in that instance. Well, I guess my question is, regarding this particular issue is, what are the have there been votes or public opinion polls from the folks from Idaho, just to see what they say about this sort of thing?
We've had some opinion polls done, but the House in Idaho actually put a memorial saying we want to discuss this with Oregon, and it passed the Idaho House. We've heard from the governor saying, well, if it passes the Senate, then I'll take a look at it, and it seems reasonable to me. Our problem is not Idaho. Idaho would love to. Oregon has a very liberal marijuana stance and very liberal abortion stance. And Idaho is not. They don't have legalized marijuana. There's very, very limited abortion access in Idaho, and these are passed by the people. And what it would give Idaho is that it would move the border approximately 200 miles to the west. So it would move farther away from Boise and the population centers, the massive.
It would actually help Idaho be more conservative.
It would actually help Idaho be more conservative.
Now, here's the question I have, and please forgive me for interrupting, because I'm fascinated by it. I'm totally supporting what you're doing, and if a non-Oregonian can help out, that's great behind the scenes. I'm a lawyer, by the way, by trade. But I think the issue that's going to make Oregon say, in fact, I thought it might be kind of cool for y'all to have somebody dressed up like Moses and go to the state house in Oregon and say, "Let my people go."
Well,
We're actually starting a campaign on electronic billboards to make those statements. Let our people go. Eastern Oregon,
Yeah.
greateridaho.org. Or why do you like keeping slaves? greateridaho.org.
I like it. But I'll tell you what is even better. It seems to me, I would think that if you analyze the tax money that comes in from Eastern Oregon, did I get it right? Eastern Oregon versus the services that are paid for. Because you got to have school systems, and you got to have social services, and you got to have state police, and you got to have prisons. And I would bet that if the Westerners saw that they would have more money, they would have money to spend on their progressive nostrums. More money to spend on progressive nostrums if they let the East go, then people are going to follow the money and they're going to say go.
We actually had an economic study done, and it is posted on our website, greateridaho.org, that says for every taxpayer in Western Oregon, they pay $690 a year of their taxes to support Eastern Oregon. And we're talking a couple million taxpayers over there. That's a lot of money.
Right. That's a lot of money. And they could spend it on giving homeless and migrants and stuff all kinds of privileges. As a matter of fact,
yes.
Did I read correctly that fentanyl was briefly legal in Oregon?
Yes, all drugs were legal in Oregon.
Fentanyl. I'm talking about the bad one that can kill you.
Yes. I was actually reading today that overdose deaths went up by 33% in 2020 before they repealed that. But yes, all drugs, fentanyl, heroin, coke, you name it, it was legal in Oregon for a period of time.
Yes. Because if they understand the money, they'll do it, because that will be because then they'll have more money to spend on themselves.
That is one of our arguments, and it's always been one of our arguments, is that they would have, I think it's something like $3 billion comes out in Eastern Oregon. I don't remember the numbers. I haven't seen them in a while, from Western Oregon. And look at how much more things that they could do with that if they just kept the money over there and no longer supported us. That same economic study said that Eastern Oregon would become self-sufficient under the Idaho taxation system and have an increase in economic activity between 2 and 5%.
Wow, somebody's really thought this out.
What is different?
I admire them for a radical idea. I love being radical when it's for a good
difference
cause.
in the Idaho taxation system? Well, if you became Idaho, or I should say became part of Idaho, are you going to have more Second Amendment rights? Are you going to have different taxes? Are you going to have more private property rights? Are you going to have different education system? What's the, aside from getting away from the leftist nonsense of the coast of Oregon?
There is a totally different taxation system. Idaho has a small property tax, has a small income tax, and a small sales tax. And those monies stay more in each county, is the way I understand it. I haven't studied it a lot. But there was this study done, and you can go look at it on our website.
What about the Second Amendment?
The Second Amendment, Idaho is totally free. I happen to be a concealed carry weapons person.
Amen.
most of us here in this county are. We had a sheriff for a while that believed in it, and he passed everybody, and our current sheriff is somewhat of the same like mind. But it's also true that if I have an intruder breaking through my door, it could be 2 hours before a police officer shows up because they could
Now,
be someplace else in the county.
Oregon is probably a shall issue state where if you apply for a concealed carry permit, you get one, but Idaho doesn't require a permit, correct?
I haven't studied their gun laws a lot. It's something I probably should do and spend some time looking at. I do know that with my concealed carry permit in Oregon, I can carry concealed in Idaho.
In Idaho. Okay, so they have
There's
reciprocity.
reciprocity.
There's
And I'll tell
reciprocity
you
with
something
Idaho.
else. Yeah, I would bet that there's constitutional carry.
It might be
You don't have to have a
recognition, not
permit.
it's recognition, not reciprocity. There's a little bit of a difference there. Some state like Virginia will recognize a concealed carry permit from Maryland, but Maryland does not reciprocate with Virginia.
No,
Right, right. That's
absolutely.
right.
There's a difference.
Yeah, because they're concerned about allegedly about um background checks and things like that.
Yeah, because you're going to get your permit in Maryland or Virginia, and you're going to drive to Maryland to rob a liquor store. Yeah. Okay.
So what's the next move that's going to be made? I guess the Oregon legislature is going to go back into session in January.
Right.
Is somebody going to introduce a bill to
Yes.
at least look into this?
We're going to attempt to have bills introduced both in the House of Representatives by Representative Owens here in Eastern Oregon and by Senator Diane Lithicum from Southern Oregon, Southeast Oregon. We'll try to get the bills in. The problem is usually the Senate, the head of the Senate and the Speaker of the House try to kill these bills because they have a super majority for Democrats. When they redistrict Oregon, they gerrymandered it so bad that they guaranteed a supermajority in Oregon. And
Are you saying that they could even override a veto?
Yes.
If the governor vetoed? Okay.
However, the governor, our current governor, Tina Kotek, was the Speaker of the House that gerrymandered the state.
Of course she was.
So it guaranteed that Oregon would stay progressive and stay under Democratic control.
So again, I think what you have to do is you have to find a progressive or maybe somebody who's not so progressive who can be persuaded by the money to take this on. In other words, the Republicans can all vote at whatever little bit they have, but then if you get some Democrats to say, we're tired of dealing with this, we'll save the money, let's just let them go.
Actually, we find it easier to talk to Democrats in Oregon about our movement than it is to talk to the Republicans.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they feel they need to play along with the Democrats. The Republicans need to play along with the Democrats because we're such a minority. Maybe someday they'll say yes to one of our things if we're nice enough to them.
Well, I know what I would do if I was in Oregon.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
I would be fighting hard.
We are fighting hard. Eastern Oregon is fighting hard. And Representative Owens, which represents, you got to understand, our counties out here are bigger than Rhode Island, are bigger than Delaware.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. The county I live in, which is the 5th largest, is bigger than Rhode Island. And there's much bigger counties than this one. I can drive for 2 hours. There was a statement in one of the interviews, if you watch on the KGW, the Portland NBC station, came out and interviewed our sheriff. And he says, I can drive 100 miles an hour to get across the county and to reach a gun shooting. And it'll take me an hour at 100 miles.
Wow.
So
Wow.
you got to understand the landmass out here. You know, if I drive
Yeah.
for 3 hours, I will actually pass through about 3 counties.
I would
Yeah.
imagine.
Hours.
Yeah, I would imagine Eastern Oregon is bigger than the whole state of Virginia.
Yes, it is. Very much
When
so.
we were in Arizona, here in Virginia, a lot of the counties are like between 400 and 500 square miles, the big counties. In Arizona, the county was 11,000 square miles.
That's
11,000,
crazy.
but they only had like 30,000 people. So when you see a sheriff out there, it's a rare sighting because they have to drive so far.
That is true in the
Mm.
county that I currently live in, where I think around 5 or 7,000 square miles in this county. And we have
Wow.
4 sheriff's deputies and no city
Yes.
cop.
And Rhode Island is only 1,450 square
Yeah.
miles. And you all have the 75 speed limit on the interstate, right?
You know, I haven't been on the interstate for a while, but yes, on the interstate. But out here, it depends on which direction you're going. There's 4 different ways to get out of our town. If you go one way, it's 55 miles an hour. If you go any of the other ways, it's 65 miles an hour. So you have to be
Well,
very
I'm taking
careful.
the 65.
Well, it
every
depends on where
time.
you're going. It depends on where
Yeah.
you're going and why you're headed that direction.
Yes.
But you know, people keep saying, well, I have a very liberal sister who keeps yelling at me because I drive a large SUV. And she says, you need to get an electric car. Well, we're in the middle of December here and it is currently snowing. For me
Yeah,
to
you
leave
don't want
town
that.
and go to Walmart, I have to go over 4 mountain passes. Now tell me I'm doing that in the snow in an electric
An
vehicle.
electric car. Yeah, probably not.
You know,
Probably
Definitely not.
And the problem
Mar-
with the electric cars is it just moves the carbon somewhere else.
it
Mhm.
really does.
Controlling the people, not fighting climate.
Mm.
That is very true.
Markel, did you have
Well,
any
I want to
questions?
say that I know I've talked a lot, and I apologize for talking a
Nah,
lot.
y'all
although
look
this
good,
is
man.
exciting, and I'm thankful to get you on here because you know, if you guys can get, and by the way, you're making me want to come to Eastern Oregon. It sounds like a beautiful place. The people are great. That's what it sounds like to me, and I know I'm rooting for Oregon in the football playoff. Go the Ducks, you know, but because I don't think they've won in a long time. But
They have
if
not.
you guys get away with this, people in Washington State, people in California, maybe even people in Virginia. I know that Illinois is starting a movement to basically secede from Cook County.
Yeah.
Yes.
They want to form new Illinois, and
They
so
are
I'm
also
saying
doing
if
some
you guys
voting like we
succeed,
are to
it's
become
going to be
Indiana.
like gasoline.
Yes,
And these efforts are
much
going to
so.
exponentially get more important.
that is very true. We're in contact with almost every organization that is looking to break up their state. They call us. We've had the distinction of having a lot of political success. You know, we've had 13 counties out of 36 vote on this, and all of them pass it. We've had 2 counties vote on it that did turn it down, and those were on the west side in the southwest Oregon, a little closer to Salem and the population. And those issues had to do with marijuana, because if we join Idaho, we give up marijuana. And that is one of the big issues here. The other thing, one of the other big issues with Oregon is we have a progressive minimum wage. Every July, our minimum wage goes up by 50 cents, 75 cents, or $1.
So
If
what's
I
your
go-
minimum wage now?
Where I am at, it is 14,
Okay.
I believe. But it will continue to grow by 3 to 5% every year. But for me to go to a McDonald's in Eastern Oregon and buy a meal is $15. For me to go to Dairy
Wow.
Queen and buy a Dairy Queen burger basket is $15 here.
Wow.
because minimum wage is so high. The other thing is that Oregon is looking to raise our gas tax, which will affect the shipping of everything. We don't get anything in this county without it coming in on a diesel truck.
Yep.
They want to raise the gas tax here to $1.90 a gallon.
And you don't even have self-serve
Wow.
or full serve anymore.
We do not have full service. This is
They
a
got rid
funny
of
story.
that.
Do you want to know why? Eastern
Why
Oregon
is that?
got rid of it. We had a Western Oregon senator that went clear across to Ontario, which is on the Oregon-Idaho border, and had a meeting out there. They had a committee meeting out there. And we're talking a 7-8 hour drive from Salem. And he went to this meeting. It ended approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Mountain Time. And he started driving back across the state after having a meal and finishing the conversations, and got to the center of the state in a little town called Burns and ran out of gas. All the stations were closed. In Oregon, you have to have an attendant pump your gas,
Yep. Like New
New
Jersey.
Jersey.
just like New Jersey. Well, the senator showed up there after our streets here roll up at 9 o'clock. You don't have anything open after 9 o'clock. He showed up in town at like 9:30, trying to get the last 5 hours into Salem, and he couldn't even buy a gallon of gas because you have to pump your own gas. So they went back. Once he made it back to Salem, he goes, "This is ridiculous. So we're going to make self-serve available for any county that has less than 40,000 people." And so Eastern Oregon got to pump their own gas. And then it went statewide in the
Yeah.
last year to where we can actually pump our own gas. But in Oregon, they still have to have some pumps that are attended so that people with disabilities or elderly can get help with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Understood.
But we used to, if we had a medical emergency and I hadn't filled up with gas that day, and it's a 3-hour drive to the emergency room for me,
No gas.
and there was no gas that day at night, I wouldn't have been able to go. All of us out here in Eastern Oregon have what we call Air Life. We all have to carry Air Life insurance because if you get sick, you're getting on a plane or a helicopter and you're leaving to go for medical attention.
Wow.
And your family cannot go with you on those vehicles. And if it was after hours, you didn't get gas, you didn't go. So, I actually backed the idea of being able to pump our own gas. It started out that you could only pump after sunset your own gas. I guess it's safer if you do it at night than during the day. I don't know.
I don't want to hear.
But
Y'all
now we can pump our own gas at any time. Most stations here in Eastern Oregon do have an attendant and will come out because we're just polite people and we believe in helping our neighbors.
Wow.
You know,
Josh or Markel, do you guys have any last questions for Miss Gilson?
No, I just have one quick question. It's been on my mind the whole time, and it's always what was the slippery slope that started this? What would you say is the beginning stages of what set everything into motion for you guys to want to, pursue this mission? What was, and I know it could have been years, decades ago, but what was that slippery slope that seemed like it set it off, and that maybe you possibly think to yourself, I remember when we started going down this route, or when we elected or selected this particular person, that things was going to be a little different.
Like I said, Oregon has been under Democratic rule for 40 years. So it's been coming and going. For me personally, Eastern Oregon or Oregon schools were always supported by what we called the timber tax. For every time a timber log was cut down, there was a percentage of that sale went to support schools and counties. They killed that in the 1980s with this little owl called the spotted owl. and killed the timber industry in Oregon with this little tiny owl, which, by the way, has thrived even with logging. That started in the 1980s, and that's when people really became more disgruntled. All of my life, I was raised in Eastern Oregon, and I'm well into my 50s. It's always been, well, we should be our own state. Eastern Oregon shouldn't be with Western Oregon. Actually, the history of Oregon, when Oregon went to form its state, there was many representatives from the west side, and all of Eastern Oregon into Idaho, into Montana, and a little bit of Wyoming was represented by one person. One person. And that person stood up and said, you should never put Eastern Oregon in with Western Oregon because they're too different. And they argued and argued, and the west side said, oh no, we need them. And we're considered Western Oregon's playground. Everybody comes out here to hunt, to camp, to fish, to play in our woods, and that's why we became part of Oregon. It was actually an argument at the time back in 1858 of not taking Eastern Oregon because Eastern Oregon is so diverse and so different than Western Oregon that it shouldn't be. But at that time, there was one representative for millions of miles represented, when there was a whole bunch of representatives from Western Oregon that wanted it. And so from the beginning of Oregon, Eastern Oregon has always been outvoted. It's been that way since the concept of Oregon.
Wow.
So
Josh, any last questions?
Well, no, I know, I was thinking about this during the whole presentation. Is the idea of the state of Jefferson, is that still something that anyone's pushing, or is that pretty much gone away and a lot of the same folks are going into greater Idaho?
California.
The state of Jefferson took up Southern Oregon, Northern California, and it got really close to being voted on. Do you know it was scheduled to be on the Senate floor to be voted as a state on December 8th, 1941? Of course, we all know what happened December 7th, 1941, and therefore the whole agenda for December 8th went away. But it was scheduled to be voted on December 8th, 1941, and probably would have passed. There is still a contingency of of the state of Jefferson around. They haven't had as much political effort as we have had, and political wins that we have had with this idea. I still run into them every once in a while, and we have long discussions, and they would rather be Idaho than Oregon, but they want their own state, the state of Jefferson. But that idea has been around since 1940s.
Wow. Well, this has been an extremely eye-opening conversation for me. I know that we began talking about you, Miss Gilson, when I think Jeff asked me why parts of New York City didn't secede from the city of New York. And I live in Staten Island, New York, and there have been several times in history where Staten Island wanted to secede from the rest of New York City, and then Sandie brought your organization to our attention. So this is, I guess, the closest I've ever been to a group of people deciding that they want to get their freedom. So I appreciate you coming on. If you could just tell our viewers, and Markel will splash it under your picture when we do the editing process, if you could just give people your website and your email address, and if we could stay in contact with you guys through the process, we would love to do so.
Absolutely. Our website is greateridaho.org. Please go out and read what we're doing and why we're doing it. We're looking for donations to do this digital billboard campaign in Salem, which is our state capital, starting during this session. It's not a lot of money, but it's a little more than we have at this time. And we are looking for financial backers on that. And there is a donation button on our website that you can do. We have a lot of news articles out there. You can also find us on Twitter, on Facebook, and every other Substack. We now are posting articles on Substack about the history of Oregon. That's where I got a lot of my history facts, and a lot of things that are coming out of Salem now are posted on Substack.
Yes.
So join our
Yes.
Substack. But
Yes,
it is
we will definitely-
greateridaho.org.
Well, we appreciate
Very
you
nice.
to visit with us, and you're always welcome to come back. So we want to kind of keep in touch with you again.
Yes,
Okay?
I'm excited. I'm ready to help. Although I
Yeah.
don't usually have a lot of money to give for campaigns and stuff, but I'll see
yeah.
what I can do. I'm hoping that we're actually gonna make the web page that there was this interview on Talks Over Drinks about from all the way in Virginia. Because
Well,
I can tell you, this is going to spread like wildfire if you can get this
has.
done.
And one of my cats is really intrigued right now. We have
We
two
just-
of them.
We just sent a letter to President-elect Trump asking for his
Yes.
support and help. And so we're hoping that President-elect Trump will recognize us as a group, and we will hear back from him. So we're excited that we continue to have so many wins.
Well, that's
Yeah.
great. We appreciate you, Miss Gilson, for coming on. And we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up for the evening. Again, my name is Corey
Excellent.
Fauconier. As always, my partner in justice, the God Markel Prines, my brother of another color, Jeff Kleb, my libertarian brother, Josh Huffman, and everyone's favorite Nazarene attorney, Sandie Sanders. We are Talks Over Drinks, and remember, folks, it's never too early or too late for Talks Over Drinks.
Hoorah.
Cheers.
All right, let's talk over drink.
Talks over drinks.